Now this again is a very confusing question for students. So the question here is, are all D block elements transition metals? And if not, then which are the D block elements which are not actually transition metals? So put down your answer in the comment section below, and you can feel happy that you got your answer right once we go through this class. Okay, so I am asking you to put down those elements which are transition metals, which are D block elements, those D block elements which are not transition metals. So put those down in the comment section below. So let's start with our answer. So first of all, let us understand what are D block elements. So D block elements are those elements in which we are filling up their D subshell. Okay, so D subshell is being filled for all of these elements, starting from scandium right here and going up to coppernicum in the last. Okay, so all of these elements are actually D block elements, but we'll ignore the 7th period for the purposes of our discussion, because the 7th period elements, they are all artificial elements. Okay, so they are not naturally occurring, most of them. So we just are not talking about those. So we'll only focus our discussion up till period number 6. Okay, so that is the first thing. Okay, and in this period number 6, starting from till period number 6, the last element that will concern ourselves in the D block is actually mercury. So all of these, starting from scandium and in that middle of the periodic table and going up till mercury, we have this D block elements. So from these D block elements, what are transition metals? So first of all, we need to understand what is the definition of transition metals. So they have some properties which most of you would know. For example, they exhibit multiple valencies, which means that they form multiple charges in their ions. Okay, ions with multiple charges. And secondly, you might also know that their oxides, sulfides, those compounds, they have very beautiful colors. Okay, for example, iron oxides, right? The copper oxides, those are like copper oxides, they are green in color. Iron, we all know, is bright red. Okay, so they have these bright colors in their compounds. So those are the transition metals. Okay, so that is what should come to your mind: multiple valencies and colorful compounds. So transition metals. Now what about from these D block elements which are not transition metals? Okay, so the definition, okay, so those were the properties. The definition of the transition metals is that their ions, okay, so we are not talking about the metal itself, but we are talking about its stable ions. Okay, so the stable ions of the transition metals, at least one of those stable ions has half filled D orbital. Okay, so that is the definition. If there is a D block element, it forms a stable ion which has half filled D orbital, then I'll say that that particular D block element is actually a transition metal. Okay, so now we have to, all we need to do is, from all of these D block elements, we need to find those which form stable ions, and those stable ions, right, or any of those stable ions, they should not have, a single one of those should not have half filled D orbitals. So let's start with zinc. Okay, so zinc is a very important example, and we already know that. What about zinc? So zinc has the electronic configuration as follows. So it is 3d10-4s2. The only ion that the zinc makes is zinc 2 plus. And in this ion, it has lost the 4s electrons. The 3d, we already talked about why it would lose 4s electrons first in a separate class, but that is the case. Okay, so it has lost the 4s electrons. Those two electrons are gone, but the d orbital, more importantly for the purpose of our discussion, the d orbital remains completely full, which means that the only valency it exhibits, zinc, is +2, which is zinc 2 plus ion, this ion. And in this valency, in this ion, the D orbital is completely, the D subshell or the D orbitals, they are completely full, and therefore zinc is not a transition metal. The same goes for cadmium and mercury. Okay, so they do not have a single ion, stable ion, in which the D subshell is half full. Okay, so therefore they are not transition metals. Now what about scandium? Okay, so all others, right? So these all others, starting from group number 4, are actually transition metals, because they have valencies. At least one of those valencies has half filled D orbitals. Okay, so those are all, that is all a given. Now what about scandium? See, scandium, the configuration is argon 3d1 4s2. Okay, so that is the electronic configuration. Now, for the longest time, people found that scandium would form only one stable ion, only one stable valency it would exhibit, which is Sc+, in which it had lost this particular electron, the 3d one. This electron was actually lost, which means that the only ion, the only stable ion that we found for scandium actually did not have half-filled d orbital. So for the longest time, people used to think that scandium was not really a transition metal. But recently, what we have found out is that scandium also exhibits +2 valency. Okay, it also exhibits +3, but that is not important for this discussion. In the case of +2 valency, this is the electronic configuration for scandium. Okay, which means that it has lost the s electrons, the 4s electrons it has lost, and in that case the 3d orbital, more importantly, that is half filled, which means that scandium in its +2 valency, which is also stable, which is found in certain organometallic compounds, which means it's found in organic compounds, the scandium actually has this +2 valency, and in that valency there is half filled d orbital, and therefore this scandium is now classified as the a transition metal. Okay, so IUPAC has now classified scandium and yttrium both for this same reason. It has now classified them as transition metals. Of course, lanthanum is still not a transition metal because it does not exhibit the same valencies. Okay, so lanthanum is still not a transition metal. It does not exhibit a valency in which it has d orbital, half-filled d orbital. Okay, so with this, now we understand what are transition metals. So these all, okay, scandium and yttrium are transition metals, and going from there to these are all transition metals, and it continues till copper, silver and gold. Okay, right here. The only three, the D block elements which are not transition metals, therefore, are zinc, cadmium and mercury. Okay, so that is the answer to this question, and those of you which got it right, kudos to you, because it is not a trivial question. You have to be familiar with recent science also. Thank you.